Okay, this is the NFC look at the first quartile. It's week 5. We're looking back at what our expectations were, what really happened, and what we see going forward, and any other interesting, unique things that kind of stood out to us that's transpired so far. Um, Ron, we've got the AFC in the can in part 1. This is part 2. We're going to start with, I guess, one of the most interesting divisions. Now, we already knew that each of the teams in the NFC East played the weakest schedules, and people are making a big deal that you've got 2 and 1 teams and 1 4-0 team. We knew that was kind of possible, just based on their scheduling and such. The Eagles have performed better than I thought that they would. They're looking pretty darn solid. The what's odd about them is last I checked, they're averaging over 300 yards per game just in the first half, and had more yards in the first half per game than 5 or 6 teams have for their entire game. So they're looking pretty good so far. Let's see what happens. Cowboys were left for dead after game 1. After game 2, I bet them to win the division because I don't think they're dead. I think they're very live. The Giants are obviously the worst 3-1 team in the NFC. You need a new ringtone, and Washington, a huge disappointment. I just thought that they could, it's an ugly 1-3. It just is. They got pounded by the Lions, and they just have not looked very good. And what are your thoughts on this division so far?
Well, that was the Washington head coach calling me. He begs to differ with how you feel about them. Yeah, you can take it up with him. As far as this division is concerned, I think people are going to be disappointed in these teams. They look good right now, but they're probably going to come back to the pack. If we look at Dallas, we're looking at a team right now. They're really happy. They're 3-1. They've overachieved. But I'm not sure that's sustainable because this quartile is their toughest quartile. They've got the Rams and the Eagles on the road. They host the Lions, and then they host Chicago. Okay, so the Lions and Chicago are at home. But is a 2-0 guaranteed against the Lions and the Bears? I'm not sure because the Lions have shown a lot of life offensively, and the Bears are playing a little bit better defensively. And when they go back to Dak Prescott, I don't know if it'll be a seamless transition. The Giants are a 3-1 team that probably should be 1-3 based on the fact that Tennessee missed a field goal and they had a couple of other games that could have gone in either direction. I love the coaching. I love the GM. I think there's new talent that's been in there, but here's the quarterbacks they faced so far. Tell me if any of them are Hall of Famers. Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield, Cooper Rush, Justin Fields. Now, based on that,
that's really weak.
I think those are the hidden things what people should think about, in that they're going to face tougher quarterbacks beginning this week with Aaron Rodgers. They came into this season actually subtracting James Bradbury from their secondary, the weak link of their team, but they haven't been exposed so far, and now they're going to start to get exposed. So I like what the Giants are doing. I love that Barkley is more than just your traditional running back. He adds value to the overall team, but it's not enough. Every wide receiver they have is injured, so I think you're going to see regression there. Philadelphia's pass defense is Super Bowl worthy right now. I'm going to give them some credit. I think they've got a lot of good things going on. If I had any concerns, it would be that the offensive line for Philly is not perfect. They've had some injuries and retirements, and their +8 turnover ratio is not sustainable.
Let's bounce back to Philly since I've got the Giants open. They very well are going to lose their next 4 games the way things are shaping up here. So that 3-1, they're going to be happy to be 4-3. when they hit their bye week. I would think, and quite possibly 3-4. So, I said it last year. I said it before the season started. Galladay was a disaster. He wouldn't be a part of the team. He just can't stay healthy, and now he's unhappy on top of it. So you've got the quarterback problems with the injuries there. The wheels are falling off the bus for the Giants. I think that's clear. I'm not sure what the hell's going to happen with Washington though. They're not doing anything well. Their offense is a little bit better than their defense, but it's still bottom. It's bottom of the second tier, so to speak. And the Philadelphia. Let's get back to them. What did you say about Philadelphia coming up?
That they're coming up. They've got Arizona and Dallas, at Arizona and host Dallas. Then they have a full bye and they host Pittsburgh and then go to Houston for the short week Thursday game. Very possible another 3-1 from Philly the way they're playing. I think over the long run, I said that the offensive line and the turnover ratio probably not sustainable in terms of that area. But I think they will be the division leader after the second quartile.
Well, Philadelphia's got an easy road, and you take a look at Dallas's schedule coming up, and if I'm not mistaken, that's not too difficult either. I mean, well, yeah, it is. So you've got at the Rams.
It's tougher.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get to the Rams. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah. They've got a tough game versus the Rams. And then they go to Philadelphia. That's a rough back-to-back.
I'd like to finish this division by just talking about Washington a little bit. Carson Wentz is a problem. The second quartile for me is only 2 games long, because if they don't win both games, it doesn't matter what the third quartile or the fourth quartile is for them. Look at their next 2 games. They host Tennessee, and then they go to Chicago for a short week game. But, it's not a terrible travel situation. They're going and so on. They're playing Chicago. Chicago is basically one-dimensional right now. If they can somehow cut down on their turnovers and cut down on and do better in pass protection, I wouldn't put it past Washington to be 3-3 at that point. And then we could start saying, well, okay, they've got a host of divisional games left. Ron Rivera, he's a decent coach. It's really, in my opinion, and see if you agree with this, Washington's season boils down to week 5 and 6. That's it. What are they going to do the next 2 weeks?
Well, and there's no reason they can't beat Tennessee, and there's no reason they can't beat the Bears. And if somehow they get on that little mini roll and put some stuff together, having Green Bay at home, Green Bay's, kind of sputtering. They're getting away with stuff. And we know the Colts may potentially melt down by the time they see the Colts. So
that's a weird game though, because that brings Carson Wentz back to Indianapolis, and that's an emotional game for maybe not for Matt Ryan, but for every other person in the organization. That's why they have to go 2-0 before that game, because then if they're 3-3 in that division, they can withstand a loss at Indianapolis. But if they don't win their next 2 games, I think you have to look elsewhere for your division winner.
I see this division as a 2-horse race, though, the Eagles and the Cowboys. Do you see anybody else possible to win that division?
A lot depends on coaching. You have to have a lot of trust in the Cowboys coaching staff to keep them that high. Even though on paper they're a far better team on paper than the New York Giants. But we'll see.
NFC North. Minnesota Vikings are up there at the top at 3-1, but it's certainly not an impressive 3-1. It's not a garbage 3-1 like the Giants, but they don't feel like a 3-1 team. And we did, I think in the last divisional preview before the season started, thought that they could, really surprise. So for as poorly as they have played, 3-1 is really, really good and sets them up nice if they can get their act together. Green Bay, if things had gone differently, they could be 1-3 technically. They've gotten away with some lucky breaks. They, they played the Bears. They played a decimated Tampa Bay, and they barely squeaked by the Patriots. They're lucky to be 3-1, quite frankly. Everything's kind of laid out for them. Obviously, the Lions are the surprise of the division. They're the number 1 scoring team in the NFL, and they're also the team giving up the most points. It's absurd. So the interesting stat that I tweeted out is that Goff and 2011 Stafford have identical stats. I mean, same number, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, within 50 yards or 75 yards passing, and within 5 points scored by the team after 4 games. The difference is Stafford was 4-0 and the Lions are 1-3. The Bears, I can't believe they got 2 wins, but they did, and they're showing a little bit of life. But that's still a situation that I don't see getting all that much better for them. The Lions, hit by that injury bug, if they can just get healthy, they had by grading purposes, I think PFF, the number 1, Sewell is the number 1 person at his position. They had a top 5 running back and top 5 wide receiver statistically at the same time. And Goff is doing just fine. So if they can just get some help, if they could just have not even adequate, a subpar defense, they could do some damage potentially. But their defense is, horrible. How do you think this division is shaking out so far versus expectations, and what do you see for the next 4 weeks?
This is great because I have nothing to say about the Lions. Absolutely nothing. They're going to be 3-7. They're done. They are what they are. They're building for the future. So let's concentrate on the other 3 teams. Sorry. I've got some stats for you. Justin Fields has 34 completions and 34 rushing attempts through 4 games. They're a work in progress that we're lucky to play San Francisco week 1 to grab that win. I mean, that was just a golden spot. And it's just not unexpected that they're 2-2 and they could actually get to 4-2. But they're an extremely incomplete team that just had schedule circumstance fall in their direction. The other stat I have for you in Minnesota, 158 passes have been thrown by Kirk Cousins. Under Mike Zimmer, that would have taken 7 games. It's taken him 4 games. I mean, think about that. This is if you think the Lions from 2020, the Vikings from 2021, don't even think about it because that's not the same team. So if you're assessing Minnesota, you should already be turning over your data, but don't even worry about 2021 for Minnesota. They're differently coached right now. They have only 7 defensive sacks, but I still think that number is going to trend up. I projected them at 47. I also projected, if you remember, 10 toss-up games for Minnesota at the beginning of the year. And frankly, I wrote an article last week that said, I just give up. First I'm up on them, then I'm down on them, I'm up. I said, let's just let the season play out right now. Let's let the first 4 games play out. I don't know what I think about Minnesota anymore. And what did we see? I think they've had 4 close games, 4 weeks, 4 close games. I just think every game's a coin flip right now with Minnesota. They have to keep Dalvin Cook healthy. They have to mask their problems in the secondary. It's not a good secondary. In this league, you're always in trouble if you don't have a good secondary. As far as Green Bay, you're right. They're doing it with smoke and mirrors and Aaron Rodgers. They're 3-1 with a metrically very poor offense right now. A lot of good running backs. They're discovering what their wide receivers are, but they don't have necessarily separation. They're relying on precision route running, and not all the guys are good route runners right now. They're getting healthy on the offensive line. Their defense looks really good. I would guess that you have them statistically in the top tier defensively for Green Bay, because that's what they deserve to be right now. And so right now I basically still have them ahead of Minnesota, but with so many variables with Minnesota and toss-up games, I think it's a coin flip still.
Here's a real oddity. I have Minnesota's defense rated higher than their offense somehow. What about you?
That would be odd. I would not have guessed that at all. I would put Minnesota middle of the pack defensively, and I put Green Bay much higher than Minnesota defensively.
I'm talking about just Minnesota. I have Minnesota's offense rated lower than Minnesota's defense against the rest of the league. Okay. You would have thought that their offense would be, knocking on the top 10, and they're not. And their defense actually isn't as bad as, it has been in the past. I mean, they were bottom 5 last year, and they're a little bit above middle of the pack so far. What are you seeing?
Well, I see a middle of the pack defense right now, but I think there are holes that are going to be exposed by some of the quarterbacks coming up on their schedule. So, overall, I think Minnesota will regress to. Well, I don't know, but it depends, because if their sacks do ramp up, that's a portion that's very important for their team. But if the sacks don't ramp up, I think they're going to be in the 20 range.
I don't have Green Bay in the top 9 for anything, and they're the division leader. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this division. A successful season for the Lions is just showing improvement, and they've clearly shown that improvement already. So if they don't make the playoffs, it's not going to be a disaster year, especially with that defense. They're going to have to get rid of that coordinator. But this is a 2-horse race. We got Vikings, Packers. We'll revisit again in 4 weeks. NFC South, what a mess that is. You know what? You lead this division.
Okay. Well, basically, we were cautiously optimistic about New Orleans, and really that's the team to talk about more than any, because even though Atlanta, we saw signs at the end of preseason that they're going to be better than we thought with Mariota and what they're doing, they're still not a threat for the playoffs, really. This was about New Orleans and expectations, and with that veteran defense and with the excitement of Michael Thomas back and Chris Olave at wide receiver. I mean, they were looking so good. And to me, they've been the biggest disappointment. And we can talk about that more, how you feel about that. But their sack ratio is 7-13, which a -6 sack ratio, which hasn't been seen in New Orleans in a while. I don't have the numbers in front of me, Chris, but their fourth quarter scoring isn't bad. Their quarter is scoring 1, 2, and 3. Look how far back they got behind in some of their games, especially game 1. Actually, game 1 and game 4 in London, they had to fight from behind to make it a game against Minnesota. In game 1, they were way behind against Atlanta. What's going on with their game planning without Sean Payton in the room? It's been incredibly disappointing, and they basically have handed Tampa the division. I think you'd agree with me that Tampa's not as good as last year, but it doesn't matter, because I think New Orleans is clearly bad.
And I like to hear the talking heads, still think that Tampa has an elite defense. I don't think it's elite anymore. They have had some injury issues on the offense, but and maybe they'll get better offensively. They absolutely have to get better offensively. But we thought that was one of the teams that could go south. I ended up betting season wins under, but their schedule gets a lot easier going forward, doesn't it? Ron?
Yeah. Well, their schedule gets easier for one big reason: the rest of the division isn't that good. They play Atlanta this week. So this is a litmus test for Atlanta to see if they're really good. Because now Marcus Lattimore was ejected in that game, Tampa Bay, New Orleans.
Yeah, and that was such a cheesy. You know what?
Yeah.
That I hate to piss and moan, but the Lattimore ejection was pretty unfair in my opinion. And then they had a cheesy pass interference, and things just fell apart. That was a very competitive game, and New Orleans was on pace to actually probably win that game.
No, they would have won that game because Tom Brady's game plan when Marcus Lattimore was on the field, actually the last 5 games that Marcus Lattimore has been on the field against Tom Brady, it doesn't work for Tom Brady in the pass game.
No.
But when he was off the field, what did he start doing? He started to throw downfield, take chances with his receivers, and the 50-50 balls became 75-25 balls, or like you said, pass interference. And calls or no calls, it didn't matter at that point. When he was ejected, that changed the nature of the game. And maybe I'm too hard on New Orleans because they could have won that game and they came close against Minnesota, but I just don't like the way they're scheming. And that's why it scares me that Tampa could still win 12 games with a team that's clearly not as good as last year.
Well, and then let's not forget this latest Minnesota game. They got jobbed that whole last drive that Minnesota had. Those final 2 penalties were, just gifts. And it's a shame. The Saints should have came away with that win too. So, they very well could have flipped the record here, and it's a shame that they haven't, but they don't feel as good. None of the team, Tampa and New Orleans do not feel as good, and Atlanta's 2-2 with smoke and mirrors, and now the Peterson, or whatever his name is he's going to be out 4 or 5 weeks. How important is he going to be for that Atlanta offense that's been clicking along nicely?
I don't think I would make any adjustment for him. He's a dynamic player in a lot of ways. To me, his best value used to be on kick returns. You just couldn't stop him on kick returns. He was a field changer. They'll have to diversify their offense. They brought in the backup running back who did a pretty good job. It won't be quite the same, but they weren't using Patterson at all, actually, in the pass game. They were using him as more of a traditional power runner based on his body type. So it doesn't change much for me. I think Mariota fits in this offense very nicely. I'm just curious to see what happens when they play Tampa, San Francisco, Cincinnati. What happens to their defense? Because I think the defense actually is going to regress. Not that I thought it was great to begin with. I think they're overachieving a little bit. I think Atlanta's a nice story that will probably beat me on the season win total because they look that good. But there's still a lot of areas that concern me on the team. I think if New Orleans continues to go south, of course, Atlanta blew that week 1 game, but it could be a battle for second place.
And, Carolina, we haven't spoken about them. One last comment on Atlanta. Mariota's healthy. He's not going to stay healthy that whole season. They're going to have to deal with that also at some point. But this Carolina, I didn't see any of the game, but I understand Baker was just embarrassing with a lot of his throws, just missing wildly, throwing over their heads, and just a huge disappointment. The fans, the Boo Birds, are out there when they want Darnold in there again. So and things don't get any better with San Francisco, the Rams, the Bucks, at Atlanta, at Cincinnati. Boy, is Matt Rule even going to make it to the bye week? I'm not so sure. I see no optimism for Carolina if they didn't get off to the strong start. And McCaffrey's banged up once again too.
The victim of circumstance, Carolina unfortunately lost because of a 57-yard field goal week 1 and a 50-yard field goal. So theoretically, we could be talking about them as a 3-1 team that was not deserving of 3-1, or we could be talking about a 1-3 team that should have been better. And realistically, they're better than their 1-3 record, but I think Matt Rule has two places where he could lose his job. One is this week if they get embarrassed after San Francisco comes off an emotional win and should be flat this week. And right before the bye, like you mentioned, I think they host Atlanta that week. If they lose that game with 10 days before the next game, I think Matt Rule doesn't survive that. Ceiling is 3-3 for this next quartile. They should have been at least 2-2 right now. Floor is 1-5, 0-6 even.
Yeah, I don't see them going 3-3. And then just my final comment on the division is nobody in this division is rated highly at all, including Tampa Bay for obvious reasons. Tampa Bay's offense is sluggish, dead middle of the pack, and their defense is not up to normal standards. We've got one division left, and boy, what a mess this is. Everybody's 2-2. 3 of the teams have a negative scoring differential. I feel really good personally. This is a discussion I'd like to have. I don't understand. I spoke to a lot, several very smart people that essentially laughed at the prospect of San Francisco beating the Rams coming into Monday night. For me, it was night and day, clear. I mean, it wasn't even close, and I told them that. And their perspective was that it's not even close in their perspective. So it's very odd how there's a group of people that think the Rams are, in my opinion, much better than they are, and will not give San Francisco their due credit. We both discussed ahead of time that we think that the Rams are an above average team. I think Stafford is hurt. They dropped 3 or 4 interceptions that they could have had. He's constantly in these 3rd and long situations that he got away with last year that he's not getting away with this year. The metrics are not very good at the Rams. Their offensive line is weak. It's not a top-notch offensive line like in years past. I don't know. What's the argument for the Rams backers at this point? Have you changed your opinion? Do you think they're better or worse than you thought they'd be?
Well, I had them worse than other people thought to begin with. So they're playing to my expectations. They were a 9-8 team last year until how many times have we said this? They added Beckham. They added Von Miller. And they made the team better than it was. Now they're back to the same 9-8 team, only without their left tackle who retired. Who wouldn't think, and with Stafford's procedure at the beginning of the year and and the first place schedule, who wouldn't think that they would be any better than 9-8? I didn't understand that argument to begin with. What are my arguments for why they could be better? Because there's still some issues with San Francisco. They don't have their leading running back. George Kittle isn't 100%. You saw him only catch 2 passes. They're missing their left tackle. He's gone for the year now, Trent Williams. So San Francisco is not.
He's gone for the whole year now?
I believe so. At least 8 games. I mean, they talk about it. If he comes back at all, it's going to be December.
Yeah.
So, pretty much you're going to have to live without him. Jimmy G is a capable quarterback, but he's not a top 10 quarterback. They're living on a really good defense. I mean, a really good defense that obviously had their way against the LA Ram offensive line, and who wouldn't have seen that coming anyway? But they've got to get healthy. I don't see separation between San Francisco and LA. I'm not necessarily down on LA. I just think they are what they are, a 9-8 team that'll probably look to add 2 or 3 more bodies in the middle of the season, and then we'll have to change our perception again. Because to make the playoffs, I think they're missing a couple of pieces.
It's kind of surprising to see Arizona 2-2 because they just seem so bad this year, so disappointing. I don't have them at the top half of the league. Just something's wrong. The play calling's been horrendous. The only success that they seem to be having is when Murray is just kind of winging it, and that's not going to last. And so they've been a disappointment because they've started out previous years very well, and they came out of the gate flat. And we know that they traditionally finish bad or poorly. And obviously, this is without Hopkins, so things may change when Hopkins gets back. But the Arizona defense, it's not. Oh no, the Arizona defense is just trash. So even with an improved offense, I think they're going to have some difficulty. And is it my imagination, or they're getting crushed every first half and then make these miracle comebacks?
Well, clearly Murray is better when he improvises than when he follows script. Basically, he's probably not even reading the script. That's one of the problems with the organization. But I still think offensively, especially when Hopkins comes back, that's Cliff Kingsbury's pride and joy. They're going to score 20, 25, 30 points a game. It's what happens when the defense is on the field and can they protect leads. And right now, their pass rush is weaker than it has been in the last 4 or 5 years. The key stats for me are always offensive line, defensive line, how they work together, what the sack ratio is, what the turnover ratio or what the turnover tendencies are of a quarterback, and what the pass defense percentage is for a team. And in 2 of those 3 areas, we've got problems with Arizona, and that's why they tend to underachieve. I think Arizona still has a sneaky shot to go 2-1. I have only 3 games in the next quartile because then they have the bye week. So if you look at it, they host Philadelphia. It's going to be an interesting game. They're the deserved underdog. At Seattle, where they've won 4 of their last 6 against Seattle, and that was against Russell Wilson. And now they're playing Geno Smith, although Geno Smith's playing better. And then with Hopkins back, they host New Orleans. So 2-1 is the goal. If they get to 2-1 and they're 4-3, and San Francisco's roughly 4-3, and the Rams are roughly 4-3, the mindset is still there for the Cardinals, and everything's in front of them.
I'm sorry. Why did you only use 3 games in the quartile?
Because the next game, they have a week off after that. So
no,
I'm thinking, coach. They don't.
They've got a 10. They've got a long. They've got a
10-day break. They got the mini bye.
10-day. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think like coaches do, and coaches aren't going to think game 8 is part of game 7. They're going to think, what can we do before the mini bye? And that's always been the way I approach it. So to me, this is a 3-game quartile.
Okay, I see. And then we have not discussed, in my opinion, a very strong candidate for comeback player of the year, the number 1 quarterback in the NFL in a lot of people's statistical analysis. I believe he's completing 77% of his passes. I don't have any of the data in front of me. And his quarterback rating is like number 1. A couple of other stats that I saw. Geno Smith is doing very well for Seattle. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, that what the hell is this 70-year-old guy sticking around for if he doesn't have something, in the works? I just could not see him being part of a rebuild. And their defense, Detroit and Seattle are 2 peas in a pod. Seattle's defense is just horrendous. It's actually worse than Detroit somehow on my rankings. And Seattle's offense isn't quite as good, but it's being serviceable, certainly. So they're the biggest surprise so far, in that division. Where do do they have any potential to keep it going in your eyes, or is it the party's over from here on?
We started the show on the AFC saying, why do we do this? And why we do this is try to match our expectations to reality. My expectation for Seattle at this point was 2-2. So I am not surprised at where they are now. Now we turn to metrics. We look at the metrics, and this looks bad. I hate to say this, but this looks bad. I think Pete Carroll relished this challenge, but it's going to be a challenge moving forward. This is a team that's allowed 115 points. Their pass D is horrible. Their run D is horrible. Geno Smith has exceeded expectations, but is this the ceiling? How much further can he do? I mean, how much more can you do besides 77%? I think we've seen the best of Geno Smith, and this is what it took to get to 2-2. allowing 45 points and winning, and then barely holding on against a Denver team, a fire drill week 1. So Seattle is, I think they've met my expectations at 2-2, but the road ahead is really, really dangerous and treacherous for them. And I hate to say this because, I wanted to zig when others zagged. And if Seattle can somehow get to five wins or more, I'm going to be a very happy camper with the alternate lines and everything else. It's going to be hard.
We have the boldest prediction we've ever heard on this show is that Geno Smith will not maintain 77% passing percentage.
Unbelievable bold prediction there. They're actually in some negative situations coming up, and with the metrics and the situations, because you can't be all situational based. Just because, you could say Rutgers is in a great situation against Ohio State. What does that mean? Because Ohio State's going to trounce them no matter what situation is going to be there. You have to combine metrics with other factors, game placement, injury situations, bye week. There's so many things, but the metrics become the most important things after week 4. But the situations are bad for Seattle. And the metrics are bad for Seattle.
Well, no, they're not. The defensive metrics are bad, but they're okay.
No, the offensive metrics aren't bad because they have a diversified attack. They have Lockett and Metcalf on, that are 2 outstanding receivers. They have Penny, who's doing very well. Eventually, they'll get Kenneth Walker, the rookie, into the rotation. But who are they going to stop?
I think that this week 5 is the most interesting for the NFC West, looking at all these different divisions. I just see the Rams have a tougher than, tough game against Dallas. The Seahawks have a tough game. Arizona's got the home field in a tough situation with Philadelphia, and the 49ers are expected to come back on a short week on the road. This is going to be interesting results as far as this division goes. I'll say it. I stand by it. I think San Francisco is the cream of this division. I think they win this division. And if they can avoid injuries, I think they are on track to win the NFC at this point. Any thoughts on that?
Well, and we talked about that when we talked week 2, when I threw at you the season wins, the adjusted season wins. And we talked about divisions, and we both said San Francisco at plus 150 was kind of a gift at that point. And because they were no longer in the build up Trey Lance mode anymore, they were in the we can win with Jimmy G mode. So the present became more valuable for San Francisco. The future became less valuable because now Lance will be in a learning curve next year. But you and I don't care about next year right now. We care about week 5. We care about this year. And so this year, San Francisco got elevated. So that's why I agree with you.
And I think it's disappointing that they're only 2-2. They should be 3-1. And they cost themselves a game in Denver. But
that's true.
They had the injury situation in that fourth quarter, and the backup was just abysmal. But you've got to be prepared for that.
Let me give you a final thought on San Francisco. And that I'm not saying that they're going to win the division like you are. I'm just saying we have value at plus 150 because it's a toss-up. That's how I'm looking at it. I think San Francisco is in a dangerous situation this week, personally. Maybe more versus the spread than finding a way to win, because maybe Carolina and Baker Mayfield find a way to lose. I will say that if San Francisco does beat Carolina, that's a nice thing to have after playing an emotional Monday night game in a playoff revenge and coming back and beating Carolina. Then we're on to something.
Well, Carolina can't even hit 17 points. I know there's some goofy stat of an absurd amount of games where they're only scoring 17 or fewer, I believe. So you just can't win games in this offensive NFL of 2022. On that note, we're going to cut this off. Appreciate you joining us. If you are interested in the AFC, we've got an AFC version of this first quartile look. And this is going to be a wild and wacky week 5. The spreadsheet's out. I think I'm going to have 7 or 8 side bets this week. And a lot of them are turning my stomach. So we'll hopefully we'll survive and have a good week. Good luck to you, Ron, and good luck to everybody. We'll see you guys in the near future.